Look at that ghetto girl trying to play intellectual. Does she even know which fork to use at dinner? The Harvard debate captain's sneer sliced through the mahogany-paneled auditorium. Sarah Johnson, the only black competitor from South Chicago Community College, flinched as laughter rippled through the front row. She gripped her pen until her knuckles paled, shoulders squared beneath her thrift store blazer. Her eyes never left her notes. That calculated cruelty would boomerang spectacularly when, 20 minutes later, Sarah would stride to the podium and silence the entire hall, her steady voice exposing an email thread the privileged captain never imagined would surface. Blood drained from his face as she methodically dismantled his career. By nightfall, the National Collegiate Debate Association delivered its first-ever sanction against Harvard. The timestamp on that damning evidence? 3:14 a.m., precisely when Sarah was changing IVs during her hospital night shift. What invisible weapon did this 19-year-old possess that would shatter Harvard's dynasty? Sarah Johnson hadn't planned to be a debater. Growing up in South Chicago meant planning for survival, not trophies. At 19, she juggled night shifts at Mercy Hospital with classes at Southside Community College, sending half her paycheck home to her mother and younger siblings. Her debate coach, Ernesto Martinez, had discovered her arguing with a political science professor after class, not disrespectfully, but with such precise logic that the professor had actually changed his position. "You don't choose debate," Coach Martinez had told her that day, sliding a team application across the table. "Debate chooses you." He'd leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Remember Rule 3, Sarah. It'll save you when nothing else will." The Southside debate team was the first in 15 years to qualify for nationals. They called themselves academic refugees, brilliant minds who couldn't afford elite universities despite their talents. Michael was working 3 jobs to support his grandmother. Tanya had been homeless her junior year of high school. What united them wasn't just circumstance, but hunger. The desperate need to be seen, to prove their worth on a stage that had been designed to exclude them. The real prize wasn't the trophy, but the scholarship scouts who attended nationals. One perfect performance could change everything. Harvard University's debate legacy loomed large over the competition. 43 consecutive sectional championships, 8 national titles. Their debaters moved with the easy confidence of those who'd never questioned their place in the world. They traveled with research assistants, wore custom suits, and carried leather portfolios embossed with the Harvard crest. Their captain, Jackson Williams, was a legacy admission whose father sat on the university's board of trustees. His debate style was rapid-fire terminology mixed with condescension, a strategy designed to make opponents feel intellectually inferior before they'd even begun. "Look at their Instagram," Tanya showed Sarah her phone. The Harvard Debate Society's page featured a post mocking quota teams with a caption about maintaining standards in an age of participation trophies. Sarah handed back the phone. "They've already decided who we are. Let's show them who we actually are." The National Collegiate Debate Association tournament occupied an entire hotel conference center in Chicago. 5 judges, 3 from Ivy League backgrounds, would determine which teams advanced through preliminary rounds to quarterfinals, semifinals, and ultimately, the championship. This year's format included an unusual element: cross-examination periods where debaters could directly question their opponents. Coach Martinez gathered his team in their small prep room, actually a converted storage closet compared to Harvard's spacious suite. "This isn't just about a trophy," he said quietly. "It's about whether talent and work can still overcome privilege in American education." As teams gathered for the opening ceremony, Sarah felt eyes following her. She'd chosen her most professional outfit: black pants, white button-down, and a navy blazer from Goodwill that she'd tailored herself. Still, she couldn't help noticing the difference between her attire and the custom-fitted suits surrounding her. While waiting for the tournament drawing, Sarah overheard Jackson Williams speaking to his teammate. "Did you see the community college roster? They're actually letting these people compete." His companion chuckled. "Diversity initiative, probably. They'll be gone after preliminaries." Sarah pretended to check her phone, but her hand trembled slightly. Years of hospital work had taught her to read lips across rooms, a skill developed during quiet night shifts when patients needed monitoring without being disturbed. It was how she caught doctors making mistakes without confronting them directly. When the tournament director announced the preliminary draw, a murmur swept through the room. South Chicago would face Harvard in the first round. Jackson's eyebrows rose, then his lips curled into a smile as he whispered to his teammate. What he didn't know was that Sarah had already begun recording every interaction on her phone for later study. Rule 3 in action: document everything. The contrast between teams couldn't have been more stark as they prepared for the first round. Harvard occupied a large corner table in the preparation area, surrounded by 4 research assistants and stacks of evidence binders. South Chicago huddled around a single table, just Coach Martinez and the 3 team members. "They have every advantage," Michael whispered, watching Harvard's efficient machine at work. "Except one," Sarah replied, carefully organizing her notes. "They've already decided they've won. That's their weakness." She continued her methodical preparation, unaware that this perceived disadvantage would become the key to exposing a system that had never been designed for someone like her to succeed. Would Harvard's arrogance finally cost them against an opponent they'd already dismissed? Coach Martinez gathered his team in their makeshift preparation room. "Remember what we discussed," he said, his voice steady but intense. "Rule 3 isn't just about documentation, it's strategy. Let them talk first, find the hole, then thread your needle." Sarah nodded, already familiar with their unconventional approach. While Harvard relied on overwhelming opponents with statistics and academic jargon, South Chicago had developed a method based on public records and institutional archives. Sarah's experience navigating hospital bureaucracy had taught her that every organization leaves paper trails. It was simply a matter of knowing where to look. "They'll expect us to be emotional, to make arguments based on personal experience," Sarah said, arranging her notes methodically. "We'll give them what they expect, then pivot to what they don't." The team had developed their preparation ritual during Sarah's hospital shifts. She'd record voice notes between patient rounds, and Michael would research while working night security at an apartment building. Tanya would compile everything during early mornings at the coffee shop where she opened. Their constraints had become their strength. They'd learned to maximize every minute. The tournament director stepped to the podium in the main hall. "This year's preliminary round topic is ethical admissions in higher education." A murmur swept through the room. Sarah exchanged glances with her teammates. They couldn't have asked for a better subject. Harvard's team approached the preparation period with casual confidence. Their research assistants produced binders of statistics, court cases, and precedents. Jackson Williams barely glanced at the materials, scrolling through his phone instead. His teammates organized color-coded notes with practiced efficiency. 48 hours until the final round," Coach Martinez reminded his team. "Every preliminary round must be won." The clock had started. For Harvard, it was simply another tournament. For South Chicago, it was a countdown to a life-changing opportunity. As the first debate began, the contrast between teams was immediately apparent. Harvard's opening statement featured Jackson Williams in a perfectly tailored suit, his posture relaxed as he approached the podium. "The purpose of selective admissions," he began, "is to identify students with the greatest potential for academic excellence and contribution to society. Objective standards, test scores, GPAs, and measurable achievements remain the most reliable predictors of collegiate success." His presentation was polished, confident, and backed by carefully selected statistics showing correlations between standardized testing and future achievement. The judges nodded appreciatively at his command of the subject. One wrote something in her notebook, seemingly impressed. Harvard's argument was familiar and comforting to those who'd benefited from the existing system. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the podium calmly. Her second-hand blazer was a stark contrast to Jackson's bespoke suit, but her voice projected a quiet authority that caused several audience members to lean forward. When we discuss merit in admissions, she began, we must first acknowledge that merit never exists in a vacuum. Whoa! Rather than attacking Harvard's position directly, she methodically identified the logical fallacies in their argument. Correlation confused with causation, selection bias in their studies, and the circular reasoning that defined merit by the very advantages they claimed to be measuring. Throughout her presentation, Sarah wove in systemic critique with personal narrative, not as emotional appeal, but as evidence of the practical consequences of theoretical policies. She cited statistics with precise timestamps and sources, demonstrating a memory for details that came from years of monitoring patient medications. The 2023 Brookings Institution study, published March 14th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, found that when controlling for socioeconomic factors, the predictive power of standardized testing drops by 67%, she noted. One judge who had been seemingly disinterested suddenly looked up, visibly surprised by her command of the research. When cross-examination began, Jackson attempted to undermine her credibility with technical questions about statistical methodology. To his visible surprise, Sarah not only answered confidently, but expanded on limitations in Harvard's own cited research. If you refer to page 42, paragraph 3 of your second source, she said calmly, the authors themselves acknowledge this limitation. By the time closing statements concluded, the energy in the room had shifted. The judges conferred longer than expected, heads bent together in serious discussion. When they announced South Chicago had won by a narrow margin, the audience's surprise was palpable. As teams dispersed, Harvard's supporters clustered around Jackson, offering consolations that sounded more like excuses. The judges clearly wanted to give the underdogs a chance, one research assistant said, loud enough to be overheard. It's basically charity. The tournament director, however, had made a note on his tablet while watching Sarah's performance. His expression was thoughtful, interested in a way that suggested this wasn't merely charity. As Sarah packed her notes, Jackson approached. His smile was camera-ready, but his eyes were cold. "Enjoy your 15 minutes," he said quietly. "We have ways of handling surprises in the elimination rounds." Sarah maintained eye contact without responding, mentally recording every word. As Jackson walked away, Coach Martinez appeared at her side. "This is where it really begins," he warned. "They'll come at you differently now. They weren't prepared today. They will be tomorrow." That evening, as the team regrouped in their hotel room, Tanya's laptop chimed with a notification. "You need to see this," she said, turning the screen toward Sarah. Harvard's research assistants had been digging through South Chicago's debate history, requesting records from previous competitions. "They're looking for inconsistencies," Coach Martinez observed. "Weaknesses they can exploit." Sarah nodded, already formulating her response. "Then we need to know their playbook better than they do." She began methodically collecting videos of Harvard's previous debates, noting patterns in their argumentation, weaknesses in their logic, and most importantly, the moments when Jackson Williams became defensive. She carefully documented each interaction with the Harvard team in her notes, creating a timeline that would prove invaluable later. What she couldn't have known was that this meticulous documentation, this adherence to Rule 3, would become the key to unraveling Harvard's entire strategy. As they prepared for the next round, would Sarah's unconventional background prove to be her greatest weakness, or her most powerful advantage against an opponent who had already underestimated her once? Sarah's alarm jolted her awake at 5:30 a.m. She'd managed only 4 hours of sleep after analyzing Harvard's debate patterns late into the night. Checking her phone, she found an email from the tournament committee with the subject line, "Important. Clarification of evidence standards." Her stomach tightened as she read. Effective immediately, all cited evidence must come from institutional sources with established academic credibility. Personal testimonies and non-peer-reviewed sources will be given reduced weight in judging considerations. The timestamp caught her attention. 2:17 a.m., just hours after Harvard's unexpected loss. Sarah forwarded it to Coach Martinez with a single question. Coincidence? His response came minutes later. There are no coincidences in debate. They're changing the battlefield. The new requirements clearly favored teams with access to university research databases and academic journals, resources that community colleges often couldn't afford. South Chicago relied heavily on public records, first-person accounts, and open-source research. With one email, their strategy had been severely undermined. When the team gathered for breakfast, Michael looked up from his phone with a troubled expression. "It's starting," he said, showing them a debate forum where comments about South Chicago's surprise victory questioned their legitimacy. Sources close to the competition suggest the community college team may have benefited from relaxed judging standards, one post read. Another questioned, how does a night shift hospital worker craft arguments that stand up against Harvard's resources? Who's really writing their material? Sarah set down her coffee, her expression carefully neutral. They're trying to rattle us. It's working, Tanya admitted. My social media is blowing up with people asking if we cheated. The tournament's second day brought new challenges. As Sarah entered the preparation area, conversations hushed. Teams that had been friendly the day before now avoided eye contact. The whisper campaign was having its intended effect. Isolation. During their lunch break, Sarah received a text from her mother. Your old high school teacher called asking about trouble at the debate. What's going on? Before she could respond, another message arrived. My supervisor asked today if you were the Sarah Johnson causing a stir at the debate tournament. Should I be worried? The pressure was mounting from all sides. Sarah's mother couldn't afford any workplace complications. She was the primary breadwinner since Sarah's father had left years ago. The family depended on both their incomes. That evening, the team gathered in their hotel room to reassess. Maybe we should just focus on making a good showing, Michael suggested. If this gets worse, it could affect our college applications, job prospects. He's not wrong, Tanya added. I need that computer science scholarship. I can't afford bad publicity. Sarah stared out the window at the Chicago skyline. The stakes had never been just about winning. They were about futures, opportunities, doors that might never open again. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. It was Diane, Sarah's night shift supervisor from the hospital, holding a care package. Thought you could use this, she said, stepping inside. Hospital's talking about your debate. We're all rooting for you. Her unexpected support bolstered the team's spirits, but as Diane left, Sarah's phone chimed with an email notification from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read simply, "They're not playing fair." The message contained just a few lines. Check the shared debate server. Password is still the default. Look for prep files on opposition research. They do this every year. It was signed only with the initials JW and included a cryptic reference to correcting a family wrong. Sarah showed Coach Martinez, who frowned. Could be a trap. Using stolen information would disqualify us instantly. What if it's not stolen? Sarah countered. Let me check if this server is actually public. A quick search revealed that the National Collegiate Debate Association maintained a public archive accessible through library portals. The shared server wasn't hacked. It was simply an underutilized resource that most teams overlooked. Sarah navigated to the site and found a folder labeled NCDA Competition Materials. Inside was a subfolder marked Harvard 2023-2024, containing dozens of documents, all technically available to anyone who looked. Among the files were detailed opposition research documents on every competing team, including psychological profiles of key debaters. South Chicago's folder contained notes about their disadvantaged backgrounds and potential emotional triggers that could be exploited in cross-examination. Most disturbing was a document titled Competitive Advantage Strategies that outlined methods for undermining opponents through procedural challenges and intimidation tactics. It specifically mentioned targeting diversity admit teams with technical violations to reinforce their sense of not belonging. Sarah documented everything methodically, taking screenshots and noting timestamps. "This isn't just unethical," she said quietly. "It shows a pattern." As she continued exploring, she discovered draft emails between team members discussing strategy. One referenced opposition research that would neutralize the Chicago problem. Sarah's meticulous documentation system, developed during years of hospital work, now proved invaluable as she cataloged each finding. The quarterfinals brought Harvard's new strategy into sharp focus. South Chicago faced a different team, but Harvard's influence was evident in the judges' approach. Every citation Sarah offered was challenged on technical grounds: formatting, provenance, institutional credibility. "Could the debater please provide the exact publication time of that research?" one judge asked during her presentation. "And the institutional affiliation of all contributing authors?" Sarah had anticipated this, having prepared detailed citation information for every source. Her hospital experience had taught her the importance of documentation. Lives literally depended on it. When she produced the requested information without hesitation, the judge appeared momentarily surprised. These interruptions disrupted her rhythm but didn't derail her argument. However, they created the impression that her evidence required additional scrutiny, subtly undermining her credibility. Despite these challenges, South Chicago advanced to the semifinals. As the rounds progressed, education bloggers began covering what they called the David versus Goliath story unfolding at the tournament. One post went viral. "Harvard's debate team seems rattled by community college challengers." The increased scrutiny prompted tournament officials to issue a sportsmanship reminder to all teams, though no specific violations were mentioned. The statement emphasized the educational purpose of debate and the importance of respectful discourse, a clear indication that tensions were rising. Sarah's habit of recording the time and date of every interaction was proving more valuable than she could have imagined. Each time a Harvard team member approached her team or spoke about them to others, she noted it precisely. "Jackson Williams, hallway outside room 342, 3:17 p.m. Some teams won't advance based on merit." The day before semifinals, Harvard launched what appeared to be their final offensive. Jackson Williams formally approached the tournament director holding a folder. "We need to file an official complaint against South Chicago Community College for evidence fabrication," he announced, loud enough for nearby teams to hear. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Evidence fabrication was the most serious charge possible in collegiate debate. It could result in immediate disqualification and a permanent ban from future competitions. The tournament committee called an emergency meeting. South Chicago was given 4 hours to prove the authenticity of all evidence cited in previous rounds, a nearly impossible task given the volume of materials. Coach Martinez gathered the team in their preparation room, now eerily quiet as other competitors avoided them. "This is their nuclear option," he said grimly. "They couldn't beat you fairly, so they're trying to get you disqualified." As Sarah frantically organized their evidence documentation, her phone chimed with another message from the mysterious JW, this time with a single line. "Check the Harvard Archive System. Search Preparatory Disadvantage Protocol 2023. The team debated whether using the tip constituted fair play. "We don't know who this person is or their motives," Tanya argued. "It could be a setup." "I won't use anything that isn't publicly available," Sarah insisted. "Coach Martinez is right. We use public information or nothing at all." A quick search confirmed that Harvard's debate archive was accessible through public library databases, part of an educational initiative the university had launched to demonstrate their commitment to open knowledge. Within the archive, Sarah discovered files labeled PDP, with dates corresponding to major competitions. The documents detailed strategies for creating preparatory disadvantages for opponents, including manipulating tournament rules, spreading rumors, and exploiting technical violations. Sarah's heart raced as connections formed in her mind. The evidence challenged by Harvard, the rule changes, the social media whispers, all aligned with the strategies outlined in these documents. With 30 minutes remaining before the committee's deadline, Sarah compiled their defense. authenticated evidence trails, source verifications, and a careful documentation of the pattern of challenges they'd faced. She deliberately omitted any reference to the mysterious JW or the PDP documents, relying solely on publicly verifiable information. The committee deliberated for an agonizing hour. Finally, the tournament director emerged, his expression grave. "The evidence has been ruled admissible," he announced. "South Chicago will advance to the semifinals." He paused, then added, "However, a notation of concern will be entered regarding the questions raised." It was a Pyrrhic victory. They would continue in the competition, but under a cloud of suspicion. As the teams dispersed, Sarah noticed Jackson typing intensely on his phone, a small smile playing at his lips despite the ruling against his team. What was he planning? Despite their advance to the semifinals, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Harvard's most dangerous move was still to come. The biggest challenge wouldn't be winning the debate. It would be proving they deserved to be there at all. As she watched Jackson whisper to his teammates, she wondered what new obstacle would emerge between her team and the championship. Would the mysterious informant's tips lead to salvation, or become the trap that finally ended their unlikely journey? The semifinal round drew the largest audience yet. University recruiters filled the back row, and several education reporters had secured press passes. Sarah noticed a shift in the atmosphere. What had begun as a typical tournament had transformed into something more symbolic, a David versus Goliath narrative that transcended debate itself. Tournament director Collins stepped forward, his voice echoing through the now silent auditorium. "Today's semifinal topic is information access equity in higher education." He paused, allowing the irony to settle over the room. "As a reminder, all teams must adhere to the evidence protocol distributed yesterday." Sarah and Harvard would face each other directly this time. No proxies, no intermediaries. Jackson Williams sat with perfect posture at the opposition table, surrounded by his team. His father had arrived that morning, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit who now sat in the front row. Coach Martinez squeezed Sarah's shoulder. "Remember why we're here," he whispered. "Not just to win, but to change what winning looks like." Sarah had been awake since 4 a.m., refining her approach. Rather than playing defense against Harvard's inevitable attacks, she'd developed a strategy that would force them to defend their own institutional values. It was risky, but after everything they'd endured, conventional tactics wouldn't be enough. When Harvard opened, Jackson was predictably polished. He argued that information access was already equitable through public libraries, online resources, and university outreach programs. The problem, he suggested, wasn't access but preparation. Certain students simply weren't equipped to utilize available resources effectively. Harvard University admits students from all backgrounds, he emphasized, gesturing inclusively. Our commitment to diversity is evident in our admission statistics, but we cannot and should not lower our standards of academic excellence to accommodate those who haven't adequately prepared. Sarah listened carefully, noting his emphasis on standards and preparation, words that had appeared repeatedly in the PDP documents. When her turn came, she approached the podium with calm determination. "I'd like to begin by quoting Harvard University's own mission statement," she said, reciting from memory. "Harvard strives to create knowledge, to open the minds of students to that knowledge, and to enable students to take best advantage of their educational opportunities." Rather than attacking Harvard directly, Sarah methodically examined the gap between institutional values and practices. She introduced the concept of institutional hypocrisy as her analytical framework, when organizations publicly espouse principles they privately undermine. "When we discuss information equity," she continued, "we must consider not just theoretical access, but practical barriers. These include paywalled research, algorithmic bias in search engines, and perhaps most importantly, institutional cultures that determine whose knowledge counts as legitimate." Several judges leaned forward, intrigued by her approach. Sarah referenced documents not yet presented, Harvard's internal communications about outreach programs that were designed more for publicity than impact. The curiosity in the room was palpable. When cross-examination began, Sarah's hospital-honed composure proved invaluable. Jackson attempted to rattle her with rapid-fire technical questions, but she responded with precise, measured answers that reflected deep understanding rather than memorization. "You mentioned algorithmic bias," Jackson challenged. "Can you name 3 peer-reviewed studies quantifying this effect in educational contexts?" "Certainly," Sarah replied without hesitation. Gonzalez et al. In the Journal of Educational Technology, 2022. Singh and Wong in Computational Education Quarterly, 2023. And most significantly, Professor Jameson's study from Harvard's own Computer Science Department, published February 2024, which found a 34% discrepancy in academic resource recommendations based on user demographics. A murmur spread through the audience. Jackson hadn't expected her to cite Harvard's own research against them. His momentary silence spoke volumes. A visiting professor from Columbia University, seated among the recruiters, was openly taking notes on Sarah's technique. 2 judges who had previously seemed skeptical now watched her with undisguised respect. The audience, too, had begun recording key points from her methodology. Just as Sarah seemed to gain momentum, Jackson's confidence returned. He smiled, not his camera-ready smile, but something colder, and raised his hand to address the moderator. "We'd like to introduce new evidence under Section 8.3, he announced, his voice carrying a note of triumph. "Evidence that proves exactly who and what we're dealing with." The moderator nodded. "Proceed, Harvard." Jackson withdrew a folder from his briefcase, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical. "I hesitate to introduce this," he began, his voice carrying precisely the right note of reluctance. "But in the interest of competitive integrity, we must address a serious violation." He placed several printed pages on the document projector. Sarah's blood froze as she recognized what appeared to be emails from her account, emails she had never written. "These communications," Jackson continued, "show that the South Chicago team, specifically Sarah Johnson, actively sought to obtain Harvard's preparation materials prior to this competition." He highlighted a sentence. "Need access to H's debate prep for nationals. Any way to get into their system?" The alleged email was dated 3 weeks before the tournament. Another message supposedly showed Sarah discussing how to use the information. "If we know their strategy before we arrive, they'll never see us coming." Gasps rippled through the audience. One judge was already making notes, her expression troubled. Tournament Director Collins stood, his face grave. "This is an extremely serious accusation. We'll need to call an immediate recess to consider these materials." As the judges filed out, the auditorium erupted in whispers. Sarah sat motionless, shock rendering her temporarily speechless. These were not her words. She had never sent these emails. But proving a negative, proving she hadn't written something, seemed suddenly, overwhelmingly impossible. Coach Martinez gathered the team in their preparation room, his expression taut with concern. "Sarah, tell me straight. Is there any truth to this?" "None," she replied, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "I've never sent those emails. I've never tried to access their preparation materials." "I believe you," Martinez said immediately. "But belief isn't evidence." Tanya looked up from her laptop, her expression troubled. "The emails look authentic. They have proper headers, your correct address." "Someone fabricated them," Sarah insisted. "This is exactly what the PDP document described, creating false evidence to disqualify opponents." Michael paced the small room. "But how do we prove that? It's our word against Harvard's, and they have the emails." The realization settled over the team like a physical weight. Everything they'd worked for, the scholarships, the opportunities, the chance to prove themselves on a national stage, all of it could vanish because of fabricated evidence they couldn't disprove. Sarah stared at her phone, recalling every conversation, every interaction of the past weeks. Then a possibility struck her. The hospital logs, she said suddenly. The first email is time-stamped 9:17 p.m. on April 3rd. I was working that night. There's no way I could have sent it. She quickly pulled up her work schedule and groaned. I was on shift, but it was my dinner break from 9 o'clock to 9:30. It's possible I could have sent something then. Coach Martinez studied the emails again. The IP address would show where it was sent from. If you were at the hospital, that would prove these weren't from you. How do we get that information in time? Tanya asked. Sarah remembered her meticulous documentation habit. Rule 3. The hospital has security footage of all nurse stations, she said. If I can get access to that footage, it would show I was with patients during that time, not on my phone. She immediately called her supervisor, explaining the situation in urgent tones. Diane promised to submit a request for the security footage, but warned it would take time, possibly more than they had. 30 minutes later, they were called back to the main hall. Tournament Director Collins stood at the podium, flanked by the judges. After preliminary review of the evidence presented, the committee has decided to allow South Chicago Community College to continue in the competition while this matter is under investigation. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. It wasn't an exoneration, but it wasn't the immediate disqualification Harvard had clearly expected. Jackson's confident expression faltered slightly. However, Collins continued, should the investigation confirm these allegations, disqualification will be retroactive and permanent. They would continue, but under a shadow of suspicion that could nullify everything at any moment. As they left the hall, Sarah noticed Jackson's satisfied smile, despite the ruling. He clearly believed the damage was already done. Back in their room, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The PDP isn't just a strategy. It's the name of a file on Jackson's laptop, and I can prove he created it on March 17th at exactly 2:36 a.m. The final round of the National Collegiate Debate Association Championship had drawn an unprecedented audience. The main auditorium was filled to capacity, with university presidents, recruitment officers, and national education correspondents occupying reserved seats. What had begun as a standard competition had transformed into a symbol of larger questions about access, privilege, and the definition of merit in American education. Tournament Director Collins approached the podium with deliberate formality. Before we begin today's final round, I want to emphasize the NCDA's commitment to integrity, fair play, and the educational purpose of debate. All evidence presented today will be subject to rigorous verification. Harvard's team entered with the confidence of those accustomed to victory. Jackson Williams led the way, flanked by his teammates and followed by a new addition, his father, Richard Williams, who took a seat directly behind the Harvard table. The elder Williams' presence was unusual but technically permitted. As a university trustee, he could serve as a team advisor. Sarah felt a strange calm as she took her position. The previous night had been spent in careful preparation, not just of arguments, but of evidence that could change everything. The mysterious message about Jackson's laptop had led her down a path that connected all the disparate pieces of the past 3 days. Today's championship topic, announced Director Collins, is merit and opportunity in American education. The topic couldn't have been more fitting for the narrative that had unfolded. Harvard opened with Jackson presenting a compelling case linking merit to opportunity. His argument was sophisticated and nuanced, acknowledging systemic challenges while ultimately defending objective standards. We can recognize inequalities in our system, he argued, while still maintaining that excellence must be measured by consistent, quantifiable metrics. He then pivoted to a direct challenge of Sarah's credibility. In debate, as in academia, integrity is paramount. When competitors attempt to circumvent the rules, when they seek unfair advantages through improper means, they undermine the very principles of merit we're discussing today. Several judges nodded, clearly referencing the ongoing investigation. Harvard was effectively putting South Chicago on trial within the debate itself. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the podium with measured steps. The room fell silent, collectively leaning forward to hear how she would address the accusations hanging over her team. "I'd like to begin by addressing each of Harvard's arguments systematically," she said, her voice clear and controlled. She methodically dismantled their position point by point, demonstrating flaws in their reasoning and evidence. Rather than becoming defensive, she used their accusations as a framework to discuss something larger. "When we talk about merit," she continued, "we must consider how it's evaluated, by whom, and for whose benefit. Similarly, when we discuss evidence in academic settings, we must examine not just its content, but its origin, its purpose, and its manipulation." She introduced Harvard's own Academic Integrity Handbook, projecting key sections on the screen. Harvard University defines academic dishonesty as including the submission of false or fabricated information, she quoted. This definition appears on page 43 of their current student handbook. The audience sensed something building as Sarah methodically laid her foundation. "I'd like to direct your attention to the Harvard Archive access logs for the past month," she continued, displaying a document on the screen. "Note the unusual pattern of access to community college team profiles, specifically access to email servers through administrative passwords." Jackson shifted in his seat. His father leaned forward, whispering something urgently. "Library database timestamps show inconsistencies between when documents were allegedly created and when they first appear in the system," Sarah continued. "Particularly interesting is a document referenced in Harvard's preparation materials as the Preparatory Disadvantage Protocol." A murmur swept through the audience. One judge was taking rapid notes, her expression intense. "I hesitated to bring this forward," Sarah said, echoing Jackson's earlier reluctance with subtle irony. "But in the interest of competitive integrity, we must address a serious violation." She displayed her screen again, this time showing an email with clear header information. "Email sent from Jackson Williams to Harvard team members dated March 17, 3:14 a.m. Implemented PDP for Chicago team. Created shadow emails. Will plant before quarters. Dad approved strategy." The silence in the room was absolute. Sarah continued with methodical precision, presenting authentication data showing original server timestamps. "This email was discovered in the public NCDA archive, accessible to any competitor through the library portal. The document properties confirm its authenticity through the original metadata." Harvard's coach stood, preparing to object, but Richard Williams placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. Jackson's face had drained of color. That was theoretical planning," Jackson stammered. "A hypothetical scenario, never implemented." "The email includes attachments," Sarah continued, her voice steady. "Draft versions of the very emails that were presented yesterday as evidence against our team. Created at 2:36 a.m., March 17th, weeks before they were allegedly sent from my account." Tournament Director Collins stepped forward. "Ms. Johnson, these are serious allegations. We would need to verify this immediately." "Of course," Sarah replied. "The verification process is simple. All emails contain metadata in their properties showing when they were created, modified, and by whom. The Harvard team's laptop contains the original files with unalterable creation timestamps. A simple forensic examination would confirm everything I've presented." Richard Williams whispered urgently to his son, who had gone completely still, his expression frozen between disbelief and dawning horror. Director Collins turned to the Harvard team. "Mr. Williams, we would need to examine your laptop to proceed." Jackson looked to his father, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The calculated confidence that had defined Jackson throughout the tournament had evaporated. Sarah met Jackson's eyes across the room. "The difference between us isn't our schools or backgrounds," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent auditorium. "It's that I came to win through preparation, while you came to win at any cost." The tournament director stood, his expression unreadable. "In light of these developments, we will take a 1-hour recess for evidence verification and committee deliberation. All teams will remain available for questions." As the judges filed out, the audience erupted in hushed conversations. The power dynamic that had defined the entire tournament had been completely inverted in the span of 10 minutes. Harvard's team huddled in urgent discussion with Richard Williams, while South Chicago's team remained calmly at their table. Coach Martinez leaned close to Sarah. "How did you find that email?" he asked quietly. "I didn't find it," Sarah replied. "I was guided to it by someone who knew exactly where to look." The identity of J.W. remained a mystery, one that might never be solved, but their contribution had changed everything. The auditorium fell silent as Tournament Director Collins returned to the podium, flanked by the full judging panel. Their extended deliberation, nearly 2 hours rather than the announced one, had only heightened the tension. Sarah sat with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, outwardly calm despite her racing heart. After thorough examination of evidence presented by both teams, Collins began, his voice grave, the committee has reached a decision unprecedented in NCDA history. He paused, surveying the room. Harvard University is disqualified from this competition due to deliberate evidence manipulation and violation of core ethical principles of academic debate. A collective gasp swept through the audience. Jackson Williams stared straight ahead, face impassive but ashen. His father had already left the room. Furthermore, Collins continued, South Chicago Community College is declared champion by unanimous decision of the judging panel based on the merits of their argumentation throughout the tournament. Coach Martinez reached for Sarah's hand, squeezing it tightly. Tanya covered her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. Michael simply shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. The committee will issue a formal statement regarding procedures to prevent similar incidents in future competitions, Collins concluded. This championship is adjourned. As the formal proceedings ended, the room erupted in conversation. 3 university representatives immediately approached Sarah with business cards. "We'd like to discuss scholarship opportunities," said a woman from Columbia University. "Your performance demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical thinking we value." Reporters clustered around, asking for statements. Harvard issued a press release within the hour, expressing deep concern and promising to recommit to integrity in all competitions. The National Collegiate Debate Association announced that same evening a comprehensive ethics review of competitive practices, with particular attention to equitable access to resources. As teams dispersed, Sarah found herself face-to-face with Jackson in the hallway. Their eyes met briefly. She extended her hand for a professional handshake, which he reluctantly accepted. "Rule 3, she said quietly as they shook hands. The confusion in his eyes confirmed he didn't understand, and never would, what had truly made the difference. The South Chicago team left the hotel not just with a championship trophy, but with something far more valuable, proof that systems can change when confronted with irrefutable truth presented with dignity. This story matters because excellence exists everywhere, not just in privileged institutions. If you've ever been underestimated or faced systemic barriers, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. The Beat Stories channel brings you these authentic narratives of underdogs who rewrote the rules and changed systems designed to exclude them. Did you catch all the clues Sarah planted throughout her strategy? The power of documentation, the importance of maintaining composure under pressure. These lessons extend beyond debate. Hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss our weekly stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change.
They say it's just how the world works. We say, change it. At Beat Stories, we capture the exact moment when justice meets its match. Subscribe if you're tired of the same excuses wrapped in different uniforms.